feet low of that dark spot. Oh, go ahead and empty it.
Ha! 6, you missed one. 1.09. Love hearing that. Good way to end.
Well, you knew this was coming. I did 45, so now I have to do 9mm, right? 45 video is remarkably well received. A lot of times you do videos and you think, wow, they're really gonna like this one, and it gets like 2 views, and then you just do another one because you're bored, and then it does really well. Let's see if we can duplicate that success. But that's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it for balance.
Don't bullshit me.
Let's get into it. So I have about 8 advantages and about 8 disadvantages for 9mm, and you're gonna say, there's no disadvantages for 9mm. Well, let's talk about it. First, the good. Everybody likes making those feel-good decisions and then dealing with the consequences later. Let's dive into it. First, on the pros list, support. You're gonna find support for 9mm everywhere. Everybody's gonna have stuff for them. Your Glocks, SIG, HK, a lot more support for 9mm. My local gun shop is not massive, and they have a wide variety of 9mm parts, holsters, and support. Works out. Cleaning gear, everything. It's great. If you buy a 9mm, you're really not gonna have trouble finding these things. Sometimes you'll find stuff for a 9mm version of a gun, and then when you go into the 45 world, you're not gonna find it. So once you start going to large frame guns, that's where you run into your issues. So 9mm, stuff everywhere. Next, size efficiency. Almost every single 9mm is size efficient. A full size 9 is slightly smaller than everything else. They're thinner and they fit more people. They almost always feel good in hand, and you get a really, really good barrel and sight radius for the size. The Glock 19 seems to be everybody's favorite, though I would push you towards the 17. The 19 has a 4-inch barrel, 6-inch sight radius, and though the grip's too short for me, still holds 15 rounds, arguably the most size-efficient pistol on the planet. Next, capacity. Capacity, everybody's favorite argument for 9mm, capacity. First off, they're usually smaller magazines. This one holds 15 rounds and it's not as long as my hand, and it can conceal very well. Very easy, right? And when you start getting into extended capacities past, say, 17, 18 rounds, the 20 rounders or 21 rounders or 19 rounders are not that much bigger, so they're easier to carry as a reload and conceal. Very, very cool, right? Because they're size efficient and 9mm is a lighter round, and the magazines are also size efficient, you get to carry more ammo. So carrying 2 9mm magazines is sometimes lighter than carrying 2 .45 magazines, based on the capacity of the 45, and for modern gunfights, more trigger presses is more better. Next on the list, almost everybody makes a good 9mm. So this is one of those like actually in the middle points, and I should have put it later, but we'll go and do it now because that's how I made my list. Most everybody makes a good 9mm pistol. I recommend a larger spectrum of 9mm from multiple different companies than I would say a 45. 45 for me is pretty short because not everybody knows how to make a 45. 9mm, it's pretty easy because the round is so small you can kind of beef up the pistol. And I can guarantee anybody watching this video, if you're halfway into guns, you can tell me that the Beretta 92 series is good. The SIG P226 or P2, I don't know what the series would be, but the 226 and the 229 are good. Glock 19, 17, 34 are good. 17L. HK VP9, VP9SK, the P30s. CZ makes great 9mm. There's a plethora of good 9mm out there, and it's not debatable. Like, you can shoot them all, they run well, they don't break. It's wonderful. There's a huge market for 9mm, and when it comes to a 9mm pistol, I'll recommend the SIG P226, the 229, Glock 19, 17, 34, HK P30, P30L, USP, USPC, VP9, VP9SK, Beretta 92 series, to include the Centurion and Compact, the CZ. Don't, on a side note, do not ever fire a Shadow 2. Please don't. I fired it and I did stupid stuff with it. Somebody let me shoot theirs and I outshot them with it. Don't do it to yourself. It's gonna haunt your dreams until you buy one. Oh, love that gun. But anyways, CZ75 series, there's a lot of good guns out there in 9mm that are reliable, that a lot of people get in arguments over because quite frankly they're all good. And with that, this is another point, but it's kind of an offshoot of the last one. There's a lot of government agencies, special forces, police, all sorts of stuff that have used 9mm pistols and demonstrated their capabilities, reliability, all sorts of good stuff, and in a lot of ways fixed problems, like some of the shitty mags that you got with SIG initially or Beretta initially, you know, advances in other technologies. In a way, you know what 9mm are good because of their track records. Every single gun that I listed has been used by somebody somewhere, and they've done badass stuff with it. Like the USP-9SD is used by the Australian Special Forces, for instance. They still use it, you know. Glock 17, 34, 19, that's easy. Germans use both of these. 226, come on. There's always a long, well-established history with whatever 9mm you're using, so long as you choose a quality 9mm. Next bullet point. There's a lot of quality ammo now on the streets for 9mm. And 9mm technology's really come up. Powder technology in general has improved. So the same powder that improve the 9mm is improving the 40 and is improving the 45 ACP. So it's not like just because they made special powder for the 9mm doesn't mean the other ones aren't getting it, but they've really figured out where the 9mm falls down, where it's really good, what loadings and chamber pressures do for what. So the advances in the 9mm ammo have allowed us to confidently carry smaller guns, which I don't do, but it allows other people to do it. You know, your Glock 43, stuff like that. Those smaller guns, the SIG P365, those guns are more effective now because of the advances in the 9mm. If you were using like 1980s 9mm, they would have been useless. So it's pretty solid. So you know if you're getting a 124 plus P hollow point, it's usually going to be really solid. You get a 147, it's usually going to be pretty solid. So, and we know the 147s perform more like a 45 with their similar feet per second, and the 124 plus P has really been adopted by a lot of people and used by a lot of people and does the best in the FBI tests. So that's something to ignore. Next, low recoil impulse and recoil mitigation is very, very easy with a 9mm. It's very, very easy to get follow-up shots. If you have a heavier gun, you're not gonna have any issues, you know, just keeping it on target, driving it and pressing shots, which is really good, and it increases your confidence in the shots you're taking, the shot accountability, which I'm really big with, and a lot of other things. So it's really, really good. You can also, you know, do 5-shot strings without really allowing the gun to get out of control. And you can look really cool for the gram, which I know for some of you is most important. Gotta look cool. And my final positive point, 9mm are excellent to learn on. You can teach all sorts of people to learn on 9mm. You can teach kids. There's that cool little girl who's on Facebook now. She was shooting that Beretta M9A3, and you can really adjust hand loads to be just what you need to cycle the action, or be really, really smooth and still be reliable. You can find a 9mm that'll fit anyone. You can be a really small man or a small woman, and it's gonna fit you. You can be a big guy and still run a full-size 9mm. It's a really nice platform for a lot of things, both for concealed carry, range, competition, home defense. It covers that full spectrum, and I'm also a very large proponent of you hand someone a gun that they're gonna learn on and grow with, so that they start somewhere with it, they grow with it, they understand it, they learn it, they shoot it very, very well, and then they start employing it in serious capacities such as home defense, personal defense, or on the job. The 9mm really shines for that, and that's not something to ignore. Okay. Talked about a lot of positive things. There's a lot of glowing love for 9mm. Luckily, even with these cons, the good things still exist. Okay? All right, strap in. Here we go. Gonna take you out of your comfort zones. First con, the rabbit hole. You have stupid rounds and stupid guns. You're gonna get mad at this. So 9mm, since it's so prevalent, is where they're gonna market all their new shit. So you get those rip rounds, you get those tumbling rounds, you get all these stupid gimmicks. All these predatory snake oil salesmen jump into the 9mm market and say, hey, you should try this new round. And it just proliferates, and it's awful, and everybody makes fun of it. They'll post pictures of it in their mags with their gun, and we're like, oh no, not you two. The 9mm ammo stuff is so ridiculous. There's 3 loads you should stick with, in my opinion, because they're the most sourceable. 115, which I don't like, but I understand. 124/124 plus P, that's where I live. That's my favorite place. And then 147 for suppressed. But we're gonna get to that in just a second, because not all 147s are subsonic. So, but anyhow, you got a lot of stupid, like light grain weight, 95 grain, 105, 85. There's all this dumb stuff. And then conversely, there's also the super heavy stuff, which you can never find reliably. I saw 185 9mm. I saw 158 from Cellular and Below, which apparently works great, but it's a weird round. So you're used to shooting, of the primary three that I named, 115, 124 / plus P, and 147. So you start shooting 158s and you're like, where are these things hitting? 158s are crazy because not all twist rates and barrels, which are usually not a problem because they can stabilize between 115 and 147s. But you start going on the super light or super heavy end of the spectrum and you're gonna get all this wild performance and it's just awful. And even within the confident loadings, like within 115, 124, 124 plus P and 147, you're gonna get some stuff that's different. You're gonna get some 147s that are moving at 1100 feet per second, which is not subsonic. And then you have to buy the Hush or the Suppressor or whatever special branded 147s they are because they don't use the right powder in their regular 147, so they have to make a new 147. So it just becomes this infinite mess. You know, you're like, well, I'm just gonna stock like 45, I'm just gonna use 147s, that's great, but not all 147s perform at that range, so you start finding the 147s you like and then they dry up. Same thing with 124 NATO, that dries up really fast. And so does 124 plus P, because most people in serious jobs know you get a gold dot, you get an HST, you get a golden saber, and I'm sure the PDX1 or whatever, you get those rounds in 124 plus P bonded and you're good, right? But there's other crazy stuff out there. I think, yeah, this is the Ranger T 127 plus P plus. I don't need this shit. I have it, but I don't need it, and it eats guns. You know, so like there's a lot of crazy stuff out there, and that's, you go down this ammo rabbit hole, and before you know it, your sidearm, which, you know, sometimes your concealed carry gunner, if you're in law enforcement, your sidearm's really important. But for the average civilian who can buy a rifle, you don't need all this complexity in your 9mm ammunition. And you get too far gone too fast. And then when you go to the store, so the normal stuff sells out, and then you're left with all this stupid stuff you'd never buy. It's really dumb. Stupid guns. So if they're gonna introduce a gun, 9 times out of 10, it's gonna be a 9mm. And sometimes it's a cool idea like the Hudson H9, but then you buy this thing and now they go out of business. Or you get stupid stuff you shouldn't be buying because your guns aren't supported because you have 12 different 9mm with 2 magazines each. Whereas you could be buying like a Glock 17 or 2 and then a shitload of mags, or just a couple of guns and then completely support them, you know? And it happens real fast because 9mm are not that expensive. You can get some performance 9mm, which are expensive. You know, your Shadow 2, your Legion, your Beretta 92X Performance or Competition or whichever that model is. There's a lot of cool stuff out there, and you start jumping down that rabbit hole. You know, some guys are smart and they'll get into Glocks, or they'll get into HK, or they'll get into SIG or Beretta or CZ, and then just stick within that, so at least the mags are interchangeable. No. There's so many. I've been to so many friends' houses where they have all these guns with 2, maybe 3 mags each. None of them are common. Can't share holsters. They don't have gear. All sorts of other stuff because you just get sucked into this, what's the cool new gun? And you just keep buying all these 9mm, and it's stupid. All right, next. Ball rounds are not that great. This is the next problem. So with 45, you can hit somebody with a 45 ball round and it's effective. Hollow points are better, but 45 ball is pretty good. Now I know what you're gonna tell me, but hey, in the ghetto, that's all they use is ball rounds. They just light them up with ball rounds. Yes, and 50 Cent got shot 9 times one time.
Well, your mama will weep if she has to wheel your ass around every day the rest of your life.
So, ball rounds are not effective in 9mm. If you don't have thousands of rounds, those high quality rounds that I named earlier, and they're not peak performance 9mm, you're not gonna be as well off. And I hate to say it like that because a lot of guys are buying 115 Tula, they've got 15,000 rounds of it and they think it's gonna be just as effective as if they had 3,000 rounds of 124 plus P HST. And it's not. It's not. Now, being able to go bang is important, all right? Having ammo is important, but The ball rounds are where the industry cheapens out. They put the worst powder in it. How many times have you heard Winchester white trash? Oh, it was Winchester white trash, that's when my gun jammed. Or, oh, I'm using Blazer brass, that's why. Or aluminum, or steel, or any of that stuff. That's where they cheap out. So you'll shoot like a premium round and you're like, wow, that's peppy, because you've been shooting trash for so long. A lot of guys get in this false sense of security where they're carrying a 9mm pistol and they're like, oh, I'm good. And you're like, what ammo are you carrying? And they're like, oh, just, you know, some 115 ball. And you just put your hand on your head like, what? Why would you do that? It's terrible. I see it more often than not, and it's very sad to me. Because it's just not as effective. Those rounds are not as effective. And I know the military, having been in the military 14 years, carries 124 NATO pressure ball. And I've seen it penetrate. I've done a couple ND cases, and the round goes forever. It's kind of like the Last Crusade, but it's not that effective. So use hollow points. Do not use ball rounds for self-defense. You should stock the self-defense ammo that you use or that you intend to use. It's a consumer's market. You're responsible. You are your own supply. So unless you're in military or law enforcement and you get issued rounds you have to use, fine, but don't sit there and tell me like, oh, I have to do this. No, you don't. Not unless you're getting it from the armorer. No, you don't. From ball rounds are not that great. We're gonna go to false sense of security, capacity, and a false perceived notion of effectiveness. And within that is light loads and not shooting self-defense rounds. So what do I mean by this? Because it sounds so similar. False sense of security comes from, I can shoot this in any situation. I know I can shoot it well, but they don't train with it, right? And it's a light gun. You got to train with your weapons. And because there's more capacity, they think accuracy through volume, or it's all about shot placement. I did a video on the shot placement argument. It's not all about shot placement. Yeah, yes, of course, if I'm in a horrible situation I'm getting shot at, I'd love to turn aimbot on and one shot headshot everybody. That's not the reality. Sometimes you got to take what you can get, all right? And other times people just spray and pray, which is something we'll get to in a minute. So you have this false sense of security because you have a 9mm that's light, easy to use, and it's, you know, you got plenty of capacity. But because of that, a lot of cats don't carry spare mags, they don't train. There's a whole list of things that don't happen. And I see it more often with 9mm guys and FUDs who carry 45s or something else. But there's a large element of the gun community that doesn't carry a spare mag, doesn't train, all sorts of stuff. And it's just really sad to me. And then they'll use really light loads. Like they'll use 115 self-defense rounds when those same people will quote you those FBI statistics and the performance gel tests and stuff. And then you're like, hey, isn't this your round back here in the gel? And this is the one I was talking about. And they're like, well, yeah, but that's all I need. You know, shit like that. You only hear that stuff with 9mm. And they won't ever shoot their SD rounds. So they'll have them, they'll put them in the gun, and they'll never run them. So when they go to the range and do shoot, they're shooting these light rounds and they're like, this is what it's gonna be like. So I've seen instances where some guys don't even know what it feels like. Where I hand them my gun and they shoot it. I'm like, hey man, finish this mag. And they're like, oh, isn't this your good ammo? I was like, I got plenty at the house, go ahead. They're like, wow, this is way different. Yeah, weird. So just keep those things in mind. You have to use the rounds that you intend to use. Don't just buy 20 rounds and think you're gonna be good with one magazine. It's a false sense of security and it's not realistic. Next, as we're all learning from the Rona, 9mm is the first to sell out. So everyone has a 9, everyone's gonna buy the ammo. So yes, it's well supported, but you see where we're at now. Every single one of these mags is loaded and they all have self-defense rounds. This is loaded. You know, I have plenty of self-defense rounds to load my guns, but that's not the case for everybody. And these aren't the only loaded mags in the house. All right, so it sucks. And if you're behind the gun, I've been there. You know, I've been overseas before. I was overseas when Sandy Hook happened, and I was like buying ammo and sending it home. but I couldn't see things firsthand, so I was always behind the ball. And luckily I was overseas, but it sucks because you feel helpless, right? And there's times where you're just not financially prepared, or you made moves, or say you had $600 for your budget this year and you bought a gun. You finally got the gun you wanted and you're like, yes! And then a crisis hits, you know, and it sells out because it's the hotness. Everybody's got a 9mm. So that's the disadvantage of having 9mm. Because of its popularity, because of its prevalence, there's a lot of people going to buy 9mm. So that's just something to keep in mind. So 9mm is also difficult to suppress for hearing safe, and I'm going to get a lot of arguments, but let's just follow me through to conclusion here. Some 147s, so finding 147 is probably the most difficult. Even when it's prevalent, you'll only find a store only carries so much because there's so few NFA owners that come to a gun shop / gun range that they don't really sell the 147s. So there's been times where I want to shoot something suppressed and they're like, oh, we've only got 250 rounds of subsonic. And I'm like, well, I'll buy that. Sometimes it's difficult. And when you suppress a 9mm, it's just as quiet as a 45. But if you're running your, let's say you want to be a mad lad and just run 124 plus P, that's going to be loud coming out of a suppressor. You're not going to get the same fuel economy out of that can in a 9mm than you would a 45 just running 230 grain. So, and then even when you get 147, some of them are moving 1050, 1100, so there's still that crack and you're like, what the fuck? This is a subsonic round. And then you get the special hush or the silencer or the suppressed rounds and they're way quieter and you're like, what the hell, what am I doing? The 9mm is not the easiest to suppress. Once you get those rounds, super quiet, wonderful gun to shoot, very, very awesome. This USP 9SD is an absolute dream to shoot suppressed, and it was super quiet, loved every second of it. But that's because Eric knows what he's doing with his hand loads. When you buy factory ammunition, it's a crapshoot. So you find something that works great, and then good luck finding it. And I know I've hit this point twice, but it's kind of important. And your 115s are not going to be quiet out of a can. They're too light and too fast. 9mm boys make stupid arguments. So again, with the false sense of security argument comes the capacity argument. I don't need a spare mag because I have 20 rounds. You know, your 1911's dumb, but I'm going to carry this single stack 9. A whole bunch of stuff. And I'm not saying a 1911 is smart. I'm saying that you can't make an argument for capacity and then carry a small 9. It doesn't work like that. So there's just a lot of dumb arguments. They think like they can just walk in, drop shot placement on the table, and then walk out. There's a lot of people being intellectually disingenuous, and it's really frustrating to listen to. 9mm are effective. They've really increased in their effectiveness and lethality, and we've had some really excellent advances in 9mm technology. So I'm not saying the efficacy of a 9mm is false. What I'm saying is the people that push it, they hear parts of an argument or they hear like one point in a discussion and go, yes! And they hold their arms up and walk around for 2 hours. Just because you have a 9 doesn't mean a lot of things, all right? You still have to train with your guns, still have to use effective ammunition, still have to know how to shoot. A lot of things go into it. But they'll immediately grasp onto and run with oversimplified arguments and it becomes dumb real fast. Despite my positions on a lot of things, if I'm recommending a gun to somebody, it's going to be a Glock, an HK, a SIG, or a Beretta, and a CZ, and it's going to be get a 9mm. But just because of that, it doesn't mean, you know, you're God tier now because you selected the best gun or the gun everybody has. You actually have to do work to be successful, but that's kind of the state of our gun communities in general now. So just be careful with that. And if you're going to talk about capacity, don't then carry a Glock 43 or 43X or 48 and be like, yeah. And then I pull out a Glock 19, which is the same size, just a little thicker than your 48, and have, you know, 1.5 times your rounds. So, and please carry a fucking spare magazine. I don't know what that is. Anyhow, or have them in a backpack or in your vehicle or something, at least be able to get back to more reloads. Yeesh. Lastly, more rounds promote more trigger presses. So if you start looking at police shootings and just shootings in general, be it in the ghetto, in the middle of nowhere, law enforcement, military, whatever, the more rounds you have, the more times you're going to press the trigger because you have more resources available. FBI statistics used to be 6 shots per gunfight, right? That's what everybody said, 2 to 6 shots. Well, that's when they had revolvers. Then when they switched to magazine-fed guns, guess how many shots? 15 to 17. You know why? Beretta 92 was an issued gun, 15 rounds. Then they jumped to the 17 rounds. So just when you have this ammo on tap, you have to be disciplined. You can't just mag dump and hope you're going to be good. And you are accountable for those rounds that you touch off. I don't care who you are, what situation you're in, unless you're like some corporate kill squad, your rounds have accountability attached to them. So unless you're committing war crimes and don't care, probably pay attention to how many trigger presses you're doing. You can really stretch a magazine out if you're smart, but it's all based on situation. I mean, if you got 5 guys coming at you, you got to really make some fast decisions and create some space. But by and large, the more ammo you have, the more ammo you're going to use. If you train and discipline yourself, then that ammo goes further and you can probably extricate yourself from that situation. Or the cooler thing is not to get in it in the first place. But you know, who am I to say, right? Those are my 8 pros and 8 cons of the 9mm platforms in general. There's a lot of good ones out there, and it creates a lot of, you know, different arguments when you're in 9mm. Like if you get a whole bunch of 9mm boys together, not all of them are gonna see eye to eye. They'll be like, 9mm is best. And then they'll be like, but my 43X is best. And you're like, well, my 17's more effective than that, but okay. Or my 226 or my P30, you know, my John Wick gun, and all sorts of other stuff. One thing I forgot, because they're size efficient, but it's easier to carry a full-size gun. They're lighter, they're thinner, and it's just a lot easier to go and carry a... But there's a lot of pros for 9mm, and I will recommend a 9mm for a new shooter. There's really a long list of what a 9mm is good for, and that's a good thing. You know, if you're a 45 guy, you have to acknowledge that 9mm are good. They're good now. This is in the 80s. You know, we're not all people walking around with similar capacity guns. So 9mm will give you an advantage in a fight. They are going to help you if you train with them, you support them properly, have, you know, backup magazines, good capacity, all sorts of other stuff. So it's really, really good. And there's a lot of good things going for the 9mm. So, you know, if you're a 45 guy, don't write off the 9mm. And if you're a 9mm guy, don't get sucked into the stupidness that is the 9mm community. Just because you have this doesn't mean the other stuff doesn't work now. You know, kind of important, but a lot of great things to be said for 9mm. I really do enjoy them. I shoot them a lot, and I would bring up, as a closer, I would have brought up ammo prices, but they're just as crazy as everything else right now. So the whole cheaper to shoot argument, I'm not gonna pack sand and salt into a wound right now because it's not fair. But if we weren't in clown Rona world, then, you know, ammo would be cheaper and it's easier to practice with these guns, but it's just not the case right now, so I'm not going to make that determination, but maybe in 5 years it'll be back to normal. All right, thanks for watching. Take care out there.